Be careful with heavy objects around the fragments of silicon. Four, three, two, one. Be careful with heavy objects around the fragments of silicon.
All right, welcome to another installment of the Fragments of Silicon interviews. Joining us this week is Carlos of MAETH. How are you doing this day?
It's good. I got up bright and early for you guys. I haven't been sleeping very well, so I may not be as coherent as I usually am, but I promise you I'm going to try to do my best.
Um, hopefully you don't have to go to a doctor or anything about that.
No, I'm fine.
He's probably just in the same boat as me.
Fair enough, I suppose. Anyway, so how we like to get started on this program is we like to get to know the person behind the game, the studio, and all of that assorted business. And we begin that journey by asking this particular question. What got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting arc because I started making mods for Halo C when I was 11 years old. This was Halo Custom Edition on the PC. That was now. How old am I? How old am I? I'm 29.
No.
Yeah, Jesus. I'm 29, so that was a long time ago. I started doing mods for Halo C on the PC, and up until I was about 14, something like that, and then I was making maps and eventually custom weapons, custom enemies, and all that other stuff. And as I started to learn the different parts that went into like making things for this game, essentially the way that the Halo editing kit worked was they just gave you access to the exact same tools that Gearbox used to port the game.
Mm-hmm.
And those tools in turn were the same tools that Bungie built to make the game without any sort of like smoothing over to make the experience easier to work with or anything like that. It still expected you to use 3ds Max, which is like professional grade software, and in replacement of that and in lieu of that, something called Gmax, which was a more accessible open source version of it, that, or not open source, just free version of 3ds Max, like 3 or 4 or something like that, which was not easy to work with. So it being a part of that community taught me a lot of the skill set that eventually transferred over into making games professionally, or at least started me on the path down there. But I took a bit of I wouldn't say detour, but a major part of my life was that I became a music producer. And the way that happened was that as I started having to manipulate animations to make new guns, you know, you then have to take sound to make it sync up with that animation. So every single, you know, chuck, put back in, pull back the whatever on the weapon, all those things have to have different bits of sound playing on top of them for it to sound good. Because if you just use whatever came with the game, obviously it was going to be desynced. It wasn't going to sound right. So I had to download something to manipulate the audio there, which was this program that is like Audacity's grandfather called Goldwave. I don't know if any of you have ever used it, but it is a miserable experience. But I accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, but I threw in a Daft Punk song in there from my cousin who lived with me's song library that he had on the shared family computer where I was doing all this stuff on. And I noticed that there was I could see something, a repetitive pattern when you look at the waveform for a piece of audio, a piece of music, and I grabbed it and I looped it, and that was just a kick drum. And because I didn't loop it properly, it played back faster, which immediately got me thinking like, oh, that's how you make music, right? Like if I just experiment with this. And that's how I started doing it. I started taking apart different songs and putting it together in this audio manipulation software. And then I looked up on Google how to make music on a computer, and the first link was for FL Studio, and I downloaded that and got started on that path. And then by the time I was 17, I got put on a tour bus. I was a EDM DJ. I was performing live to thousands of people. I went 40 stop national tour, all because of basically video games. And that was my life for about 10, 15 years after that. Essentially, it was that project. Then I took a break to just do music production for other people privately. And then I started a different project called Revel in 2017. And, you know, that was doing really well and you know, became successful in its own right. And right around 2020, 2021, well, I don't even remember when the pandemic was, if I'm going to be honest. Like those years were such a blur that essentially the entire music industry crashed, right? And I was about to go on another pretty massive tour where there's discussions for it, and you know, there was a lot of my livelihood was placed on the fact that, you know, you tour and you produce music for people and for yourself, especially dance music that's so reliant on the energy of being in a room, right? And this is true for a lot of other music that's very energetic. It's not the same to sit down at home and listen to this stuff that it is to be in a room full of people, right? It thrives and it builds off of that. So when the opportunity basically closed its doors, the whole world shut down, but music and the arts were hit especially hard, but mostly music, because it was so reliant on shows for our artists to make their living. And if there's no shows, that means no one's producing more music. That means that side of things starts to shut down. And I found myself in a position where I was comfortable, thankfully, from the years of saving that I had living up to that. And I had a few projects still lined up, but I had an opportunity basically for the first time in a long time since that first tour when I was 17, almost 15 years at that point, to really think about what I was doing and what I wanted to do. And in the back of my head, I still loved games. I still was playing games, and I had been experimenting with, at some point, maybe making a game, right? And I'd done some work for different game studios, but just in the audio department, and I'd always found it very interesting and inspiring, and in the same delusion that allowed me to just jump headfirst into making music with zero experience or zero training whatsoever and like make that work, I decided that I'm going to do the same thing for games. I'm going to make a video game. And so I started working on Sprawl officially after first like trying it out in the Source engine, like it's just like a free mod thing in 2016, and developing the world in there. And I started working on it in the Quake engine around this time, and I started posting a few of my videos in the Quake mapping discords and trying to build a fan base that way, but more because I was looking for an engineer, And, well, I am not a good engineer. I cannot code. I am fucking terrible at it, and I don't enjoy it. I think that's the biggest one. I just don't enjoy it. But so I figured if I could post, I could maybe garner some interest. Someone would come along and want to be a part of this thing. And, you know, at the end of the day, the person that reached out was Hannah, and she was my co-dev now on Sprawl, and she was working on a project in the Unreal Engine. And at first I said, I don't want anything to do with this. Like I'm already done. Like I'm already doing my own thing. Like why am I going to just close up shop and then move to a completely different engine, have to learn that. And I actually ended up playing her little vertical slice demo, which was nothing. It was just a gray box room where you could wall run and slide and jump off like that. That's it. It was just the basic movement from Sprawl. And I found that experience to be so engaging in and of itself that and have so much mechanical depth that I fell in love with the idea of like, maybe we could build something out of this. Right. And so that's what we did. And several years later, here we are. The game is out and it's done pretty well. And we're well on our way to do other things, which is an incredible and humbling experience.
No doubt. No, like, we've had people who have started their path to game dev from the modding scene, certainly, but that's usually from like Quake or some, not usually Halo. Like,
yeah, I mean,
if we had anyone else from Halo CE. Like,
it was a tiny community, especially at the time that I joined. I mean, it's nowhere near as big as Quake at any point in its life cycle, right?
Right.
And it was so hard to work with, but it was different from Quake because the kind of tools that you learn from modding Quake are incompatible basically with any of the modern workflows, whereas the tools that I learned from modding Halo basically are the same as far as like 3D software. Like yeah, 3ds Max now is ancient, but it was still a robust like modeling suite, right?
Well, it still is.
Yeah, it still is, but most people are like, oh, that's the granddaddy of everything. Yeah. They're using Maya now, or even Blender, right? Which is what I use. And
honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that Blender is free, we'd probably still be using 3ds Max.
Yeah, and I mean, and look, don't get me wrong, 3ds Max is great, and I still know my way around it to this day because of it. And whenever I had an opportunity to use it, like I would still use it, but. There's what I'm getting at is that the way that you develop games for Halo, like develop mods for Halo CE, and the pipeline and the way that it expected you to do things was like the first kind of. It's not so different. It's not a big leap, right, from doing things in that engine and the understanding of how things work. From an asset development pipeline and how the game expects things to be set up. And to what more modern engines expect versus how Quake does things, which is basically, hey, you either are going to make games in the source engine after, which is not going to happen, or you're just going to make a Quake mod, right? Because there's really nothing else that's like that. That workflow is not, and two, it's kind of detrimental too. I think a lot of the modern game engines have really poor level design tools, for example, that brush-based workflows are just inherently better, in my opinion. All of Sprawl was made in Trench Broom, all of their levels, right? Because working with brushes is just so much easier from a level design standpoint versus doing modular mesh workflows. That's why level design in modern games has suffered. It's just it's not that easy anymore.
We'll take your word for it, because like we don't really dabble in the game dev, like actual game dev. We know too much to ever want to actually do that.
We've seen horror stories.
Oh, of course. And there's horror stories everywhere with whatever passion you have. It's just what are you willing to put up with because this is your dream or this is something you really want to do. Everything in its own little way is horrible. Every industry, especially creative ones.
True enough, I suppose.
If the audience knew how much jank was behind just the stream working, they'd wonder about my sanity. even more.
True enough. Anyway, so getting to the game itself, Sprawl is this a boomer shooter?
Yeah, but in the same way that genres like music genres evolve, like this is a different take on it with different influences. This is a kind of offshoot of a boomer shooter. It's our take on it, because at this point, like
boomer shooter
there's
by way of Halo, not Doom.
I wouldn't even say that. It's more like this is just we put a lot of our influences together, right? Like this still has like the classic id weapon loadout. It's still very fast paced. The way enemies react, the way the world is designed, like the way the combat kind of flows is closer to a boomer shooter than basically any other genre, right? You can shotgun jump, which is our equivalent of rocket jumping. It's there's a lot of that DNA in our game, but there's also like this is our interpretation of the genre, right? Versus just being Quake again for the 15th, 20th, 30th, 40th time, which is what keeps happening in the genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is not to throw shade at anyone. I fucking love Quake and I'll play those games all day, and I have at least 40 of them in my fucking library, right? So
right.
But we went out on because we wanted to make our game, right, for better or for worse, and our game was one that had wall running, right, like similar to something from Titanfall, but unique in its own way. Like
Titanfall,
our wall running is
Brink for the old 360 heads out there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, the movement reminds me a lot of another boomer shooter-esque FPS called Ghost Runner.
That one's more melee focused, but yeah, I get you.
Right. I'm talking about the actual movement itself, not the weaponry.
I mean, we get a lot of comparisons to Ghost Runner because we're cyberpunk and we have wall running, but we're fundamentally completely different games. And funny enough, I mean, the world of Sprawl existed before Ghost Runner was even announced. It was just its own little thing. But yeah, like I do see it. It's cyberpunk. There's the wall running. There's the high octane combat. It's punishing. The environments are, because you have wall running, have to be set up and built a certain way, so the levels flow similarly. And yeah, I totally get it, and I respect those comparisons. But to that end, I mean, the way the wall running functions is very different in Sprawl from any other game, for better or for worse. A lot of people that get it, when they get it, they're like, oh, okay, I love this. Or when they don't, they're like, why isn't this like X thing that I already know how to play? Because that gives you the dopamine hit faster, right? When you don't have to master a mechanic versus, having to sit there and kind of fumble around like a newborn, right?
Right. I'll tell you, like, honestly, the closest game the wall running reminds me of is Mirror's Edge.
Yes. And that was what I was going to mention, is like that is the primary inspiration for how the movement feels and works, the way the gravity pulls you down, the way that there is no like you're on a wall state versus like you're on the floor state. It's all very free form, right? Whereas most games, when you put in wall running, it locks you onto the wall, and it's very much like, hey, this is a very isolated way. It's not really locked together and meshes well with the rest of the gameplay. That's at least how we felt. But it makes it easier for people to pick up, right? It's putting the guardrails on the bowling lane, right? Versus actually having to learn how to throw the thing. It's the same thing here. Like you have to learn how to move on the walls and how your momentum affects different things, and how your positioning of your mouse can affect how your momentum pushes you forward or backwards, wherever. Like there's a lot of mechanical depth here, and for a lot of people they love that, and for a lot of other people they're like, hey, I wish there was less of it.
Right. I can see the argument on both sides, because this isn't a canned animation, this isn't an auto or a simple mechanic. This is something that actually takes skill and precision to utilize, like, which can be frustrating for those who can't wrap their heads around it.
Yeah, and I mean, at the same time, like that was a risk we were willing to take. But in our wise and selves, like I think our jobs as game developers is to, offer mechanical depth, but make it accessible too. And I feel like maybe the wall running and the way that it was set up is a lot of things about Sprawl like could have been more accessible in the long run.
Possibly, but that's the kind of thing that comes up, when you've already done the thing. The hindsight.
Yeah, of course, and I think that's key. It's like, hindsight is 2020. Like, don't beat yourself up for what you did. Like, just learn from it, right? And that's how we're always going to make games moving forward. Is that each game is going to be iterative on top of the previous one. Like, the lessons we learn we're going to be able to take moving forward. And I think that's going to differentiate our approach versus a lot of other indie devs that are very precious about their project, which they're allowed to be. Like, good for them. Like, this is your baby, right? Like, for us, like, we're not. Like, we love this game and we put a lot of effort into it, and it was absolute joy to work on it. But at the same time, we're not married to any of these ideas, and if there's a better way of doing any of them, then that's damn well how we're going to do them moving forward.
We find that such sentimentality is variable. Like, fair share of devs who are very attached to the everything that they're doing in their game, but we've also had developers, especially recently, who are like the complete opposite. We had one dev who threw out all their work like a month and a half before their game was scheduled to come out. So,
wow.
Yeah, it takes all types.
Yeah, 100%.
Anyway, so what made you want to make Sprawl in the first place?
Well, I mean,
like the specific world and
yeah,
the cyberpunk aesthetics and all of that business.
Yeah, that's so. I love cyberpunk as a genre. I always have. I think like my appeal to it has been because so funny enough, like I'm Mexican, right? And I bring this up because we got anime before anyone in the West, basically, like on mainstream television. Like we grew up with like Dragon Ball Z and that kind of shit. Like literally on like that was our Sunday morning cartoon. Right, in the 90s. Like it got translated, it got dubbed into Spanish before English, I'm pretty sure, and distributed in Spanish before it did in English, and a lot of other things did. I think we got Knights of the Zodiac and a bunch of stuff. Like, so we grew up with that, and with it also our imagination got like kind of linked with the aesthetics of anime of that era. And we would have to go out and actually like look for these things on VHS at specialty stores, right? And I remember one of the first things that me and my cousins watched was Ghost in the Shell from 1995, and that lit up my imagination in a bunch of different ways. But even as I got older, I started to realize that there was a very distinct look and feel to the Eastern interpretation of cyberpunk versus the Western one, and that comes because when Gibson put out Neuromancer in the 80s, right around the same time the Blade Runner came out, like this genre inherently got married to the aesthetics of the 80s. So a lot of the cyberpunk that comes out now is the Western interpretation of the retro future, which is basically neon lights, blue, rainy city. Everything is just like blown out arcade from the 80s. And that interpretation never spoke to me because it was fundamentally one stuck in the past. Even from the music, right? It's got like the echoes of it's Perturbator. It's like the echoes of sort of like the beginnings of 80s industrial music and early 90s industrial music, which I love. Don't get me wrong. Seriously, I really do. But at the same time, I felt that there was a different and a better way, at least one that was more appealing to me to interpret the genre, which was closer to what I fell in love with, right? And something that I don't see done basically ever is something that looks and feels like 95 Ghost in the Shell, like, not even Akira, but like 95 Ghost in the Shell, I want to say, is the biggest inspiration here. And a few other things in the genre that are adjacent to it, like Blame, right? Like there's a beauty to that pure just despair and isolation that these pieces of art kind of show off that I wanted to see presented in a video game format. And my first take at it was in 2016 in the Source engine, and a lot of what I built essentially still survives in some way in this game. Like a lot of the scenes, like there's a few screenshots that I have still of that version, quote unquote, of the game that it really wasn't even a game. It was just kind of like a walking simulator in these worlds. There's a few screenshots of a few scenes in there, and like you can compare them 1-to-1 to scenes that still exist in Sprawl, right? So the mission was that I wanted to deliver a narrative in a world that was very rich and dripping in the Eastern interpretation of cyberpunk versus the Western one. And I wanted to do this as far as, you know, sonics and also the visuals. So everything about this is an homage to that versus, you know, being 80s Blade Runner retro future, which again, I don't have a problem with. Like I do enjoy that now. And you know, like anyone who does stuff in that genre and that interpretation, like it's still great. It's just not for me, you know.
I mean, in fairness, like Ghost in the Shell can be traced back to the Blade Runner retro future stuff, but yes, it is more in line with 90s industrial post cyberpunk.
Yeah, it's a different interpretation essentially, you know, like whereas a lot of what the aesthetics of the worlds for the 80s lineage, Western lineage is kind of derivative of is basically 80s aesthetics. The 90s one is 90s aesthetics in its own way. But a lot of those aesthetics are more lived in, they're more grungier, they feel closer to what our experience is in the real world, because they base a lot of the world that a lot of the world design for Ghost in the Shell 95 was literally they flew to Hong Kong and they built that city for this because they felt like this was going to be the best interpretation of like what the future is going to look like. The juxtaposition between like super clean modern cityscape designs, right, and very slummy like Kowloon walled city aesthetics, right?
Right.
These two things kind of living together next to each other was like this is what this future is going to look like. Mamoru Oshii went on the record as being like, this is, I think, the closest thing to the cyberpunk city of the future. And if we look at now that we are in the future, like that's kind of what it just looks like, right? So
maybe nowhere as extreme as the Kowloon walled city. That was a very unique building, let's say. Like,
yeah, of course.
But I get what you're saying. You know, this isn't the only Japanese cyberpunk work from this era that has this kind of aesthetic. Like, if you've ever seen the Tetsuo film,
yep,
or Rubber Lover, Pinocchio 8,
yep,
for all of those. Very grungy, very industrial, very lived-in stuff.
Yeah, that was just the 90s in general. That was the 90s in general.
Yes. I mean, I guess, you can even, like, backport that all the way back to, say, like, American films like Hackers or Strange Days, a lot grubbier.
I'm not saying they fully invented it, but it was back before Apple decided that futuristic meant having no visible features.
Yeah.
Like, anyway, so who are you in this game? Who are you? What are you doing? Who are you fighting? That sort of deal.
So you are a cybernetic super soldier named Seven, right? And your name is Seven because there were 6 of these cybernetic super soldiers before you. And basically you were their top performer. You were one of the only ones that didn't have their memories erased. You weren't hyper enhanced, you were mostly still biological. And essentially what happened is that the junta that controls this world, right? It was like a military regime that took over like corporate interests in what is essentially the last city state on Earth. Everything is fucked, right? There is nothing else. It all collapsed. We destroyed ourselves. Like we continually say that we're going to. It actually ended up happening, and all that's left is this massive sprawling city on
Make a
the
city
Asian mainland. Yeah, it's just this endless sprawling nothingness, right? Like that holds a lot of empty cities, and it's like the megastructure from Blame, but on Earth essentially, and much smaller. And so basically, you became a threat because you were still autonomous and in some capacity. And so the junta and their infinite paranoia that would happen to anyone that was cybernetically kept alive for 200 years and their brain just became mush from constant endorphins and drugs being mainlined into their systems, essentially had you removed from the playbook. And they did so by having you eliminate enemies, hacking your eyes, and telling you that these were rebels. But essentially, it was a bunch of civilians. And then ripping out the rest of your cybernetics. The only ones that you really had that were very important were your eyes and your ability to run on walls and that kind of stuff. So they ripped out your eyes and they, essentially they left you with the gun and told you it's either end yourself or get out of here because you're useless at this point. And you chose exile because you did kill these people, and you went to one of the deepest reaches of the sprawl, which is called the Walled City, which is where you start the game at. But essentially, sometime later after this happens, the junta decides that it's time to get rid of all of the rebel factions that still exist that are kind of festering, and they're doing one final push to consolidate all of their power and eliminate any sort of threats to it. And you are included on this list, and that's how the game starts. 6, which was your predecessor, finally gets his chance to kill you, and he shoots you out a window with a shotgun. And then a mysterious voice starts talking to you and explaining that there's work to be done.
I'm like, it's a bit more elaborate than a lot of boomer shooter narratives. Nothing else.
Well, there's a lot of background and there's a lot of world development, right? Because I'm a big fan of Tolkien. I'm a big fan of worlds that are rich with lore that feel like there's more stuff going on than just like, oh, here's the setting and that's it. And so the game doesn't make an effort to actually tell you more than like, hey, you're just doing things for this voice in your head, essentially. And it's up to you as a player to decide how much of the narrative you want to engage with, because a lot of the people that like this kind of game, they don't really give a fuck about the story, right? They took what John Carmack said to heart, which I don't necessarily agree with, right? And I have my thoughts on that. But I mean, they don't care about the narrative. So we didn't put cutscenes in the game. We never took you out of the character, essentially. We do have 2 small ones, essentially. No, 3, if we want to call it, where we wrestle control away from you, and that we just introduce you to a place mostly, right? And they're quite small, and then you never see the character from the third person perspective. Like, you are this character. The character never speaks. And we don't bash you over the head too much with exposition or narrative. It's essentially what you can find are these hidden PDA logs that are scattered throughout the city that essentially show you it's little scattered pieces of lore, and it's up to you as a player to piece them together and kind of figure out what's going on, right, with different characters' interactions and things of that nature. It's very similar to how Marathon does it, right? And that goes back to how I believe, this, how we want to make our games and how we want to like develop our narratives is closer to kind of how Bungie's done it than anyone else, right? Which is the concept of like, in every game you are him, you are the chosen one, and like everything happens because of you. Whereas in Bungie games, it's more of like things are happening to you. You're still pretty damn important,
Yeah.
but you don't get a say in things. Essentially, shit is just happening, and you just gotta fucking take it.
Yeah.
Right.
Nobody fucks with Master Chief, but at the same time, there's also shit going on that's not happening to Master Chief.
Yeah,
Right.
For the most part, nothing is happening to Master Chief. He is just doing what he wants to do in this world, and that's it. Like, because he has to, right? It's not like he's a soldier. And in the Marathon games, you're essentially a slave all 3 games, right? You're not doing anything because you want to do it. You as a player have 0 agency, right? You are inhabiting this world, and you are a puppet to other bigger things that are happening, and that makes the world to me feel a lot bigger. Versus like, without you, the world doesn't exist in most other games, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in this world, the world continues to go on with or without you, and maybe not much changes.
Right. though the FPS developers who tend to take that track, they tend to make the M Sims.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Sprawl in some other universe would have become an immersive sim, I think, because that's what Hannah was setting out to build. My co-developer, she was building an sim, and like the wall running was going to be one of many cybernetic implants. I convinced her that that's not what we're going to do because that game would never have gotten done. You know, like that's never going to fucking happen.
I'm like, yeah, in Sims are another level, let's say.
Not that we don't love them and wouldn't love to make one. I just think that it takes a lot to make them properly, and we would need to really buckle down to make that kind of game, and it would take quite a while. And we're in our infancy as a studio, and I think
that's not something you do as one of your early games. That's like
Uh,
3 or 4 games in when you already have a decent revenue stream, and you can take 4 or 5 years to actually do it right.
Or
exactly.
Or it's the game you really, really want to make, and you're okay with spending 5-7 years or what have you making it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's a million different ways to build anything if you're creative, right? It's just
We
deciding
would not
like what's worth it for you.
Cuphead way of mortgaging your house, though.
No. I mean, from a responsible fiscal perspective, no. But like from a emotional, like fuck yeah, like you do you for your vision. Like I respect the fuck out of that, and I respect anyone who's willing to put everything on the line to make something that is theirs and theirs alone. Like that is a show of like you are alive, you are here, you're doing this, right? Whereas a lot of people would rather be safe and do nothing than like put things on the line to actually put their vision to life. And I think that's what the essence of living is, right?
Right.
Not to fucking sit here and philosophize too much. I'm sorry, guys. But
it's fine.
like that, that's the kind of shit that gets me going. That's the kind of shit that gets me going.
Like, look, what you talk about here, that's kind of at the core of what we talk about a good chunk of the time. You know, what makes people make these things, especially since over and over again, we hear this game took 2 years, 3 years, you know, a good amount of time, a good amount of somebody's
adult life. Like, we've had a couple of those before.
Like, So it is important to understand the passions that fuel, you know, the games we showcase.
If you would have told somebody from the older generation you spent 5, 7, 10 years making a game, they would have asked you what the hell is wrong with you. They told you you'll get a real job.
Well, I'm like,
and if we go back even further than that, you know, there was masterpieces of art, the ones that hang in our museums, that took people their entire lifetimes. 30, 40 years from sculpture, and these are the things that we live immemorially in our culture, right? That is something to be celebrated, in my opinion, versus something to be skewed as being like, oh, why don't you go work in an office and do fucking nothing forever, right? That's just a product of modern capitalism, essentially. Like the requirement that we need people to do that, so therefore everything that doesn't fit into that norm needs to be chastised and removed from our collective interpretation of what is a good thing, right? Again, sorry for philosophizing, but I'm here, so might as well,
fine.
Right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Don't let me slow you down or anything, but I apologize. I need to dip so I can get to work, but I'll try and catch the rest later.
All right.
Right on. Take it easy.
Anyway, you know, just as long as we don't start ranting and raving about the bourgeois, I think we'll be fine.
That comes next time.
You know, Mac isn't here, so like, but anyway, so how big is this game? Like, is it split up into episodes, levels? Is it one persistent world?
So it's basically 3 episodes with a descending amount of levels. So the first episode has 5. The next episode, the first episode has 6, 5. The first episode has 5. The next one has 4, and the last one has 3 levels, right? And the levels become slightly bigger as you progress through the game, but it's divided this way to kind of like dictate the different themes that happen in the game and then the narrative, right? So the first episode is very much in this like city Hong Kong environment that is very, sprawling and feels like this interpretation of Cyberpunk that I love. The one in the middle is in a very dead industrial zone, like a lot of tech-based kind of look and feel to that, and it's very combat focused versus exploration focused that the first episode is in. And the third one is a very dark, brutalist technological hellscape, which is where the elite live. And these levels are very like quick flowing. You don't really have to explore too much or use your brain too much. It's kind of like you kind of are on a linear path that loops in on itself, and you're very much focused on the combat, and that's what it expects of you, that you already have mastered the game's mechanics and therefore are able to like get through these levels quite easily. But the last level of the game is different in its own right, and this one expects full mastery of basically everything that you're doing in order for you to be able to pull off completing it, right?
Right. I mean, that would make sense. Yeah, that's game design 101 for like a better term. The progression of how a video game usually goes, learning curves.
Yeah, 100%. Nothing too groundbreaking there.
Anyway, so you mentioned a bit about the Arsenal being very in the line of mold of id. But I'm wondering, did you put any unique flourishes that could be found?
Oh yeah, fucking every gun has some sort of quirk that either people love or hate. But it's all because we wanted the game to be engaging and actually challenge the player. And like obviously, we have to ask a little bit more of them than like, here's a super overpowered gun, have fucking fun, right? And so everything fits in its arsenal in its own way. Like, and this means that even at late game, at the very end of the game, you're still using the pistols, right? Every gun has its place in the arsenal, and if you master it, then you will find yourself to be at like peak condition in this game. It's the people that want to run around with the super shotgun and kill shit that are gonna not have the best time, and that's fundamentally what we heard a lot back of. It's like I don't want to be forced to play this way. I want to just play however I want. It's like, okay, well, that's not what this game is and never was supposed to be. This is a very, very different game. I'm watching you on stream, and
I think I'm lost.
You are lost because you didn't get an audio cue. You're not playing with audio, are you?
No, I'm not.
Okay, yeah, that's so go, just because I don't want to keep seeing you do this. Turn around and go back to. Just keep going straight. No, not over there. Not over there. Not over there.
Do you want me to follow the line thing, or there's like
go to where you've hit that last switch.
Yeah, in the red hallway over here.
Yeah, go in that direction. Now, do you know how there's another one of those?
Another hallway?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But we can't have audio blaring while we're doing.
No, I know. I just feel bad seeing my boy lost over here.
Yeah.
It's making me sad.
So I'm guessing it's further back in the level.
No. It's you hit a switch and a wall came up. It's going to be to your right. You're just going to go on top of different rooftops. There's a ramp leading up to it. You went past it right now. You literally just looked at it, but it's okay. We love you here. There we go. Come on, you got this.
Oh man,
you got this. You got it. Yay!
Hooray!
All right, there we go. You won't get another one of those. I promise. That this is just you
and
missed
this is only because I have audio off.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe you will. Who knows? We'll see. Sorry about that little sidetrack, but I wanted to make sure that we got some more footage here.
That's fine. That's fine. That does bring up a question I should ask, and that is like accessibility options, because not everybody could be able to hear an audio only cue. So
yeah, there's subtitles. There's the guy telling you what to do, and then we have the tutorials that tell you how to navigate in this. It's just like every other gamer, and myself included, we don't do a very good job of reading those.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the reality of it. But players that are requesting accessibility features, like Sprawl has a ton of them. We have everything from God mode. We have everything from, whatever niche feature that you're kind of looking for, you most likely will find a way to play this game. You can tweak the difficulty basically in every direction that you want, and shape the experience to be far easier for you if you're finding that the combat's too difficult. Like, you can't hit your headshots. We also have a different modifier that allows you that when you go into bullet time, it'll automatically snap onto enemies, kind of like Metroid Prime. So you can focus more on the movement for people that don't have the kind of dexterity to really be able to like run, jump, and hit headshots and all that other stuff, right?
That makes sense. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Anyway, so what about the enemy roster here? Who are you up against?
You're up. So we have almost like the similarly classic like iteration of the id lineup, right? Where because of the game's nature that it started in the Quake engine, like a lot of the enemies designs kind of like spilled over into this version of the game. So like in the main kind of soldier enemies that you're fighting, it's like the first ones are like the grunts, and then you get shotgunners, and then you get what is essentially the ogre from Quake that shoots grenade launcher projectiles at you, and then we have a dog enemy that jumps and leaps at you. Then we have a sort of like big chunky guy with the shield that charges at you like a Pinky Demon almost, and you're basically fighting like very classic boomer shooter archetypes in a cyberpunk skin, right? And the way that you engage with them is that you shoot their weak points, you shoot their heads, right, or any other weak point on their body. Sometimes they have jetpacks and you can blow them up, and when you do so, you get rewarded with ammo. It's kind of like the Doom Eternal gameplay loop, but much lighter. It's not as demanding on you, and you're not relying on glory kills or the chainsaw constantly. You have a katana, which is your melee option, that when you do stun an enemy, you can decapitate them and get this ammo back. But for the most part, the way that you're going to be taking on enemies and keeping your resources and managing them is going to be through hitting weak points. And the bullet time plays into that, because obviously running around and hitting headshots, unless you're like a turbo sweaty FPS player, is not going to be a fun experience for anyone. So you use your bullet time to slow down time, and this kind of puts you in the state where it's like, okay, it's much easier for you to hit headshots,
right,
and hit these weak points, right? And it kind of feeds back into itself, where it's like you have a lot more fun doing and engaging with the mechanics versus not engaging with the mechanics. If you run around and just treat this like a shooter, which a lot of people try to, I don't think you'll necessarily have a great time.
Right.
It's not the way that the game was designed, but you can do that if that's something you want to do.
I mean, what you're describing is, how do I put this? Much more of the early 2000s, Max Payne, and back when bullet time was like every other game.
Right. Yeah, and then that's the thing about our game design, and that's something I mentioned at the beginning, is that it's not one-to-one boomer shooter. It's a boomer shooter with the caveat on top of it. A lot of other new things slipped in, and even the way that the aesthetics are, it's like, yeah, all the textures are unfiltered, and some of the enemies are very low poly and could have feasibly worked in the Quake engine, and a lot of them did. But this is, to me, like an amalgam of the games that I grew up with versus just being, like I mentioned, Quake. But again, it's a lot of different things that I love versus just being the one thing. It's this era of gaming as I remember it versus how it was actually, right? It's the rose tinted goggles effect. So a lot of like the world design and everything, despite being chunky and low resolution pixels, it's a little bit closer to like a Source Engine game, I want to say, as far as fidelity goes. It's just without the texture filtering. And this to me like seems to have resonated pretty well with people, because it's like we've had a lot of feedback from people that grew up in this era that are my age or a bit older than me, being like, oh, this is literally like an alternate future where like games went in this direction because we didn't have to worry about shimmering in games, for example, which is a technical term when you don't
hail the god rays.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that. So there's a lot of modern niceties. There's
Right.
real-time reflections on our puddles and stuff like that. But it's like a layer of sheen on top of the aesthetic of the era.
Yeah, that it also has the movement speeds of boomer shooters, as opposed to
Definitely.
the movement speeds of 2000 shooters. Ugh.
Yeah, exactly. Because those games had to work on console, right? Like the whole reason that they got slowed down and they became so floaty,
Yep.
like Halo did, was just because it had to work with the controller, right? And this is back when people weren't they didn't have the level of dexterity they do now on controllers. I think games right now, because of kids that grew up with those games in the early 2000s and the late 2000s at this point, they have a level of dexterity with their fingers on controllers that is absolutely fucking bananas. You know, they're crazy. They're able to match PC players in a lot of way.
The latest iteration of that is people who are really good at using touchscreen.
Yeah, that's something that's crazy, that people are playing like Fortnite mobile and like winning tournaments, or like PUBG or Apex or whatever. Like that is absolutely nuts. As a player of those kinds of games,
Yep,
I can't fathom it.
I mean, you work with what you got.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, so we are getting low on time here, so just a couple more questions. Now the game is complete, 1.0, correct?
Yep, we did not do early access. We launched straight into 1.0 to our better for worse. You know, that was our vision. We did not want to do early access. We wanted to put out a full experience, because a lot of the games that were coming out at the time in the genre were just all early access games that you'd buy into, and then 3 years later you'd get a product that a lot of the times was disappointing, unless you're New Blood, because those guys have been absolutely kicking fucking ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New Blood's are goats.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, New Blood stuff tends to be among the best and most diverse. Like,
that's what happens when you just build the games you want to build, you know, and you support the devs that want to build them. Like that's just natural to me. That is essentially what we want to do. We want to do something different, but we want to make games that take less to make, and you know, pay our people better and look worse. It's the fucking meme on Twitter, essentially. That's what we want to do.
Right? We hate money and all that.
No, yeah, it's just like there's this thing going around. It's like, I want games that look worse by people that are paid better.
Oh yeah.
Like that's what we're doing.
Yeah, people say that until it actually happens, and then they start complaining about how ropey the game looks.
Yeah. Well, that's the benefit of what we're doing. I think we're leveraging the old school way of doing things for our games without making them look like shit. You know, because when you know what aesthetic you're focusing on, you're not going to have that issue, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So is Sprawl coming to consoles?
Yes, actually, we are. As a matter of fact, we're basically done with those ports, and we should be announcing something sometime soon.
Did you self-port it?
We got it about 95% way there, and then we had to start working on something we can't talk about yet, but hopefully can in the next 6 months or so. We got a new project signed. We're really ecstatic and really happy to be doing that, and we're full steam ahead on there. So we had to basically. We couldn't wrap up the sports ourselves, but Hannah's an absolute monster animal and got it 95% of the way there by herself. And then we just brought on someone else to help us to just get it past the finish line. And as of maybe a week ago, it is past the finish line. And right now we're just ironing up a couple of issues and bugs, sending it out to Sony
console QA and stuff like that.
Yeah, going through certification, the whole 9 yards. And we expect to be ready to go on that platform, on those two platforms, quite soon. We're not doing Nintendo Switch because it's just not feasible.
Yeah,
honestly.
Yeah, I'm like, it takes a lot to get a modern-esque game, in spite of aesthetics, to work on the Nintendo Switch, because it's so hardware compromised, especially given it's a 7-8-year-old system here.
That's running on 12, 15-year-old parts.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, I'm certainly looking forward to when you can announce this game formally on consoles, along with a release date. And can you mention anything about your next project, or is that just completely under wraps right now?
Completely under wraps, but I think it's going to make a lot of people happy. We have a couple things that we're working on, but this is our main project for probably our next release, and we're really happy that we're able to do it.
Okay. All right, then. So, Carlos, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule and being with us here today to talk
No
about
problem.
Sprawl. It was a very engaging conversation. Hopefully, we can have you back on the program when your next project is ready to be talked about.
Awesome.
But
Thank you so much. No, this is great. I really appreciate you having me.
Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, the game is Sprawl. It's currently available now on Steam. Is it on all the storefronts or just Steam?
It's on Steam and GOG and a few other storefronts, Epic, etc. So you can grab it wherever you like.
Okay, and it's currently retailing for $14.99, with the soundtrack also available for $4.99. Be sure to pick it up today. All right, and Petty, I believe you had something to announce here.
Yes,
regarding special.
Yeah, later this evening, Gullix, Elemental Ogre, and I will be streaming some Digimon World 3 here on the channel. It'll be around 8:30, so usual show start time for those of you not in the Central Time Zone.
Right.
So we're going to be picking up where we left off a little while back, I think back in June or July. So I need to go remember where we were at and, sort some things out, but that's for later me. But yeah, hope you all can come follow us for that. And yeah, I think that's it from me.
All right. So in addition to that, be sure to join us next time for the Sunday reviews. And until then, I shall wish you good gaming.